Well, hello there. This is Virtuoso Chess Noob, learning and having fun with chess. This is the second video where I will cover some of the ideas I explain in my new book, 50+2 Chess Quick Wins, Tactical Ideas for Exciting Chess for Beginner Players, now available on Amazon. Don't miss out on your copy. In this video, I'm going to talk about opening gambits. Learning how to play an opening gambit, a named opening gambit, is often one of the best ways of practicing a romantic or aggressive style of chess. And this is the style of chess that often allows for the possibility of a quick win to occur. Now, the different opening gambits will each have their own ideas, potential opening traps. However, underlying many of the opening gambits are some common tactical themes, tactical ideas, a common conceptual rationale, which makes the opening gambits work at all. And understanding and learning sort of the ideas that underlie the gambits will firstly allow you to be able to play the system better, and also find potential tactics when the game doesn't necessarily follow a line of theory. Now, one big idea that underlies many of the opening gambits is these following 4 points. Firstly, number one, what is being gambited is often a proffer, an offer of material, usually a pawn, where we ostensibly offer a pawn to our opponent. And this pawn seems to be often undefended. Number two, what do we get out of that? So if the opponent captures our pawn, accepts the gambit, what we get in compensation is very often accelerated development. So we lose a piece of material, but we get to move other pieces. So while the opponent is distracted, we get to build up and lead with our material, with our pieces. And in doing so, when the opponent moves their piece or captures our piece, it sometimes leads to their pieces being put onto unfavorable squares. And with those unfavorable squares, either they will have to pull back their piece or try to defend that piece, and that can often lead to even more loss of time or be disruptive to their plan. And while that's happening, we use that opportunity to assemble our potential attack. Depending on what actually happens, sometimes we have the opportunity to make a very major attack, and that in fact can lead to a quick win. The opponent has a game-ending, game-losing disadvantage, especially if they make some mistakes. Let's have a look at this in action, looking at using some of the common gambits. And we'll try to keep this framework, this conceptual framework in mind. Firstly, let's have a look at the Vienna Gambit, my personal favourite. So I've got the white pieces, and the Vienna Gambit, of course, begins with e4, e5, knight c3, opponent has to play knight f6, and now we've got the gambit with f4. So with us pushing the f-pawn, that f-pawn is not defended by anything at the moment. And for the opponent with the black pieces, it looks like they can take. Looks like they can take for free. So what if they do? If they accept the gambit, what has happened? Well, they have moved this pawn twice now. So in the opening, they've moved that pawn twice. That pawn was a central pawn of theirs, a central pawn exerting control of the center. Well, we've diverted that pawn to the side. Yes, we've lost a point of material, but we've diverted that pawn to the side. It's no longer potentially having as much influence in the center. And we now can push forward with our e-pawn. And in fact, in this opening, we can now push our e-pawn attacking the opponent's king's knight. And you will notice, in fact, here, because they spent that turn, 2 turns moving their pawn, that knight now doesn't have any defenders. It's being threatened, it can't move anywhere in the board, all the other squares are defended by my pieces, and their best good move, is to return the knight back to its starting square, to undevelop. So again, let's think about what's happened in this opening. Now, white is not winning here. They don't have a killer move, but black has moved this pawn twice, and it's ended up in a square where it's a little bit overextended. Like, black doesn't have any real way of defending that pawn on f4, other than potentially g5. But if they play g5, that's very, very disruptive to the defense on their king side. They may not want to do that. Pawns can only move forward, they can't move backwards. They've also moved the knight out and back in. 2 moves at the end of which it's as if the knight never moved. So it's almost as if white has been gifted an extra 1 or 2 moves. And this is one of the ways of thinking about what do we even mean by accelerated development. Basically, it's as if one side, our side if we're playing the Gambit, have gotten extra moves. And in the opening, that can often be really impactful, simply because we only get to move sequentially. And at the beginning, when not very moves have been made, having extra turns, extra moves, functionally extra moves can make a really big difference. It doesn't make as much difference as the game moves along. Like when you get to move 20, move 30, if you made an extra move, it sort of gets diluted out amongst all the moves. But at the beginning, here we're only on move 4, it makes a really, really big difference. So this is the idea behind the Vienna Gambit. White, the main advantage white has is extra development. We can now develop. They can't develop this way now. They might have developed another piece. It's like white has gotten an extra turn. Now let's have a look now at another really good example, another gambit that gives a really good example of some of these principles. And this is the Goring Gambit, particularly the double pawn sacrifice variation. Now the Goring Gambit begins with e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, and Scotch game with d4 captures. Now notice this pawn has moved twice, very normal in the Scotch though. But rather than going the main line, taking with our knight, what we now do is play c3, attacking that pawn. Now for the opponent with the black pieces, they're going to look, it almost looks like this pawn is not defensible, it's not defendable, so it's a little bit too advanced. Maybe we'll just capture on. So taking, really normal. That pawn now has moved 1, 2, 3 times. And here, again, we don't capture back. We develop a bishop. So bishop to c4. Think about what black is thinking. This pawn is now way too advanced. Absolutely no easy way of defending it. A logical thing, capture down the chain. 1, 2, 3, 4. In the first 5 moves, black has moved the same piece, the pawn, 4 times. And here, white captures back with development. And let's have a think about what's happened. Black is up 2 points of material. They're up 2 pawns. However, they've moved one piece 4 times in 5 turns. And at the end of all that, that piece isn't even on the board anymore. On the other hand, white now has 3 pieces developed, but the queen has open lines as well, and effectively white has 4 pieces immediately ready to launch an attack on black's king side, while black has pretty much no development other than that single knight. So again, white isn't in a completely winning position here. In fact, the evaluation is equal. Think about that. White is down 2 points of material, but the position, the evaluation according to Stockfish is equal. and the compensation that white has is in their much better position. And a human understandable concept here, human heuristic, is when the computer says that the evaluation is equal, but one side is down on material, what it must mean is that that side is better in position, and in human terms, it is easier to play when you have a better position. Simply, your mistakes are less impactful. On the other side, the opponent, it's more impactful. White, it's easier to play. And you can see in this position, it surely must be easier to play for white. Now let's look at another gambit. And here we've got the Smith-Morra Gambit. And the Smith-Morra Gambit has some very similar tactical ideas as the Goring Gambit. So here we lead with e4. And black plays the Sicilian defense with c5. Now the Sicilian defense is a really good opening for black against 1e4, possibly the best, particularly if black wants to play to win. And generally with the Sicilian defense, what happens is that black potentially can dictate how the game goes. The Smith-Morra Gambit is the immediate d4, asking the question of what is that c-pawn doing there. Now, one of the best responses for black is to accept the gambit. They can decline, but declining the gambit isn't very good for black. If they accept, very similar, again, c3. Again, if they take once, they probably will take a second time. 1, 2, 3. 3 out of 3 moves for black has been the same piece, and now we capture back with the knight. And again, no development. All of black's remaining pieces are still on their starting square. With white, we've got a little bit more development, but also we now have all these open lines for our pieces to develop. And so that potentially is really good. The other thing to think about, remember how I said the Sicilian defense is actually really good for black, and black often gets dictate the flow of the beginning of the game? Well, with them accepting the Smith-Morra, they no longer play the Sicilian. Now, the Sicilian-like lines often no longer exist, and so sometimes opening gambits can be a disruptor. You know, it just ruins the opening for the opponent. This also happens a bit in the Englund Gambit. And now I'm going to show you 2 games of the Englund Gambit where I had quick wins recently, and looking at these games from the perspective of that generic, those generic ideas, those concepts that underlie gambits we spoke about at the beginning of the video. Now, the Englund Gambit is available when white leads with the Queen's Pawn opening. So the Queen's Pawn opening, again, is potentially very good. So depending on what we do, they potentially have the Queen's Gambit, which is a really good opening for white. Potentially, they have the sort of very annoying London system. And the Englund Gambit is the immediate e5, and just like the Smith-Morra, it potentially ruins white's opening plan. It's a disruptor, because if they wanted to play let's say the London, they just can't. And occasionally when the opponent, maybe they pre-move their opening, and we can straight up just take their bishop, pretty much the game ends right away. However, there is no Queen's Gambit here. So here, in this first game, my opponent decided to decline the Englund Gambit. Now, the Englund Gambit is unsound. It's actually not a good move. White is ahead, but white is only ahead, only retains an advantage if they accept the Gambit. But once they accept the Gambit, we don't have Queen's Gambit, Queen's Pawn opening type lines anymore. Here they tried to decline. Now this is known as a reversed French variation, and here all we need to do is we can take captures. Again, this no longer really looks like a Queen's Pawn opening game. And here, I launch an attack, that's fine. They didn't really have to do anything here because they could potentially push ahead, force me to move my knight again. But if you're planning on playing a slower positional line, they're not natural sort of things you're thinking about in the opening. This was a bit of an inaccuracy. I now play d5. Let's lock that. They developed the bishop, so bishop to f4 for white. Very sensible, potential sort of looking sort of move, thinking again, sort of Londonish sort of opening. But now, g5. We can immediately attack that bishop. It's defended by the queen. So here they pull that bishop back. That was an inaccuracy. You can see they had to move back here. So if they were a London player, it's not very Londonish anymore. I develop a piece fairly normally. They develop their other bishop. And here, with the lack, with the fully open e-file, again, very unusual, I now immediately attack their queen. And, one of the things here is I'm playing a gambit. I want to play aggressive romantic chess. I want to keep throwing out attacks, and this can be very, very disorienting for the opponent. They have a think. They bring their bishop here. So, here, that bishop had to move twice. This bishop had to move twice. They're losing potential turns. And here, with the fully open e-file, queen to e4, pinning that bishop. Place pressure on the pinned piece, and that bishop's kind of pinned two ways when you think about it. It's pinned to the queen, pinned to the king. They have a bit of a think. They decide to push that pawn. Okay, that wasn't the best move, but apparently the best move was queen d3. That is definitely not an obvious looking move. I pull my bishop this way. This way was apparently better, and in this position, I think white was worried that bishop was going to be trapped with attack over attack. Again, here, there's no apparent good moves. Where are these knights going to develop? They decide to take my pawn, possibly thinking that it was undefended. Of course, it is defended. They just got disoriented. It's a blunder, and in fact, they immediately resign. They just realized their position was completely terrible. Probably the game just went down a line they didn't like. But even in this position, when you look at what were the best moves for white, these are unusual moves. Either knight to the edge of the board are good moves, or queen to d2. These are absolutely not obvious looking moves, so difficult to play for white. So that's the first Englund Gambit game. Let's look at the second Englund Gambit. And in this game, my opponent opts to accept the gambit. So they play a d4, e5, and they accept the gambit. And we now basically move down into the main line. So firstly, semi-open file, attack that pawn. Okay, so they have to try to defend it. That's the best move. Attack the pawn another time. They have to try to defend it. Again, it's the best move. And this is now down a well-recognized line of the Englund Gambit. It's the main line. And one of the things here is, if I'm playing a gambit, I should know the lines better than white. And these lines do not look anything like the usual queen's pawn opening lines. So here I've got the killer queen with a triple fork. So it's an absolute fork, bishop, king, pawn on b2. Now white here finds the best move. They usually do. Bishop back, with an attack on the queen, but I get to take the pawn. I take the pawn. Not uncommonly, white will now play a bishop to c3, which is actually a blunder. A very sensible looking move, X-ray defense of the rook, but it's actually a blunder. Black is completely winning in that position. White, however, finds the best move. They notice that they can develop the knight, that's good, potentially queen gets trapped, and there's a discovered defense of the rook. And here, one of the things that to do when you're playing a very, very aggressive and unsound gambit like the Englund Gambit, especially at the beginner intermediate level, is to double down. Keep the pressure on. So I move my knight forward, knight to b4. What's the idea here? Well, let's say that white thinks, I don't like that queen there. Looks like it's almost trapped. I'm going to play rook b1 attacking the queen because, can't take the rook, it's defended, can't take that pawn because it's defended, the queen's going to have to go here, looks really trappy, that looks really natural. However, I would now have knight captures the pawn on c2, check, That king is smothered. They've only got one legal move to get out of that check, which is queen captures the knight. I capture the queen. Basically they had to trade their queen for a knight. I'm completely winning again. So that is what I'm looking for. However, here white finds the best. White finds the best move, which is knight to d4, defending that pawn and defending that square. Very good. Keep up the pressure. c5, attacking that knight. Now here, what white needs to do is to attack my queen. So they had the right idea. They played knight to a4, attacking the queen, but the wrong execution. That's the wrong piece. They had to play the rook, because here, with a loss of continuity, I now have vision on their knight on d4. It's hanging. Queen captures the knight on d4, and you know that is still pinned. It's not good for white. And in fact, that single mistake changed the evaluation from white being basically winning. Let me have a look. Yep, it goes from about +5 to -1.8, almost -2. And you know, it's a devastating attack. Here, they decide to take my knight. That's fine. Let's trade queens. I'm up material. Let's trade down. Queen captures queen. That forces white to respond because it's a check. They have to move their knight, move their rook to capture, and now I get to take the bishop. Again, full piece up. And let's have a look at what's happened here. Here, white has some development, but they've lost a complete piece. Their queen side is completely smashed. This knight is in the wrong place, edge of the board. And that attack is so disorienting for white, you know, being just struck like that, they immediately blunder again. They try to move their knight back into the game, miss out on the fact that I cover that diagonal, takes. Basically, white is now completely lost. They make a move. Now, potentially this might have been better, because as we'll see, I push that pawn. What are they going to do? You know, they have to take potentially, or potentially push one pawn. Like, you know, it's really difficult for them to play. They take, and they miss the fact that, here we go, that very, very weak diagonal to the king. Check. White now resigns because their only way of getting out of check is to block the check with the rook, and then they will lose the rook.
Emotional damage!
Emotional damage. They resign. Good game. GG. The big takeaway? Learn and try some opening gambits, or at least learn and understand the tactics and the ideas that underlie opening gambits. And if you are interested in it, consider buying my book. I hope you enjoyed this video, and thanks for watching.